Hi, and welcome to a very special edition of Faith in Focus. I'm your host, Melanie Lawson Minor, and today we have the incredible opportunity to celebrate a remarkable milestone in the life of our community. A momentous 35 years of devoted service by Senior Pastor Dr. Gary L. Williams, Sr. Pastor Williams has not only been a spiritual leader, but also a beacon of hope and inspiration to countless individuals and families over the decades. We are honored to have him with us today to reflect on his journey, the challenges he's faced, and the joy he's experienced along the way. Well, Pastor Williams, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for allowing me to do this interview.
I'm
Great.
so fascinated and interested in your story. I know that you've touched so many lives and your family has been with you every step of the way. So we're going to delve into all that, okay? All right, so let's start though at the very beginning. Can you take us back to when you first became a pastor? What really inspired you to embark on this journey?
Great question. It was really not an aspiration of mine, but I'll never forget how it happened, at least for me to become in ministry. I had just united with my wife's church, with Maxine's church, King Solomon Baptist Church. My father passed a few years early, and so our aim is that we were going to find a church together. But what I did was, rather than us looking for a separate church, I just, united with her church. Once that took place, about 6 months after then, man, I was sitting in the congregation, and it was just like, I'm not going to call it an outer body experience, but I could not focus. And at the end of service, I knew what it was. I felt what I called a yearning. And so I went up, made an appointment with my pastor, and I told him, I said, the Lord has called me into ministry. And so we counseled and talked then. And so I did my first sermon. Sometime after that, I was licensed, I was ordained. And then when, at the time, First Baptist, we're called Hopewell now, but when First Baptist came available, I was sitting in the office on a Sunday morning. The chairman of deacons of this church had called and said, we need an ordained guy in the pulpit. And so when my pastor got off the phone, he said, he asked me what was I doing next Sunday. I said, I will be here. He said, no, you'll be preaching at First Baptist of Mandarin.
Wow.
And so that's how I, that process started.
Wow, such a blessing that you listened.
Yeah.
And you received that phone call too.
Yeah.
Let's talk more about your journey in ministry. It is really remarkable what you've been able to accomplish, especially considering the legacy of your father, which you mentioned passed away. He was also a pastor, and he passed away at a very young age of 46 years old. You're blessed to have an amazing mom who sits in that second row or first row every Sunday, Alfreda Williams, a member of your church. Can you share some of the specific ways in which they influenced your faith, how looking to them has helped you kind of solidify your approach to ministry?
I think they have been the cornerstone, the backbone, the benchmark of really my faith. I hear people say, I grew up in church, and sometimes that is said, I think, loosely, but literally I grew up in church. My great-grandmother, I remember her. My grandmother is still alive. She's 103.
Wow, it's a blessing.
We all attended First Baptist of Oakland at the time, and so I was, just a little bitty thing. But faith has always been a part of my life. I've always loved church. I've always been in love with church, just a strange kid in that manner. But, as I started pastoring, well, let me back up. Even when I went off to college and did what college students do, and sometimes
Don't
I
tell
would,
too much.
well, they already know. Okay. So, sometimes I would go out on Saturday night. But Sunday morning I would go, when I was in Bethune-Cookman in Daytona, I would be at Mount Carmel on Sunday morning. It was just always a part of, so that my parents, my grandparents have played a huge part in my faith, and then I think them introducing me to Christ and the church I never fell away from it, you know, and so it has always been a part of my life. So,
Yeah, that foundation is so important.
Yeah.
And they said no matter what you do on Saturday night, you're going to be in church
Yeah,
on Sunday morning.
they didn't know what I was doing on Saturday night, but I did. But
But you knew you had to get up.
That's exactly right.
Let's talk about the ministry. A successful ministry, it really requires everyone in the household to be on board. They have to walk with you. They have to sacrifice you at times. Can you share how your wife, Maxine, has supported you through these 35 years of service and the role that she has played in the ministry and honestly the life of the church, because she's been a blessing for each and every one of the members as well?
It's been amazing, and I am blessed, and we're blessed. First of all, I didn't know I was going to be a pastor.
She didn't know what she was getting into.
She didn't know she was going to be a pastor's wife. And, you know, when you raise that question, we have fond memories of the genesis of our ministry. And particularly one incident, you know, I was new to the church. I was young, 26, 27 years old. And so, you know, there were people, you know, they wanted, some of the deaconesses wanted her to wear a hat. Well, you know, first of all, being a pastor is new to me, it's new to her. Right. I just want to be the best pastor that I can be. Right. So they, you know, they came to me. I don't think they went to her, but they came to me to, you know, well, we want, you know, our first lady to wear a hat and da 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 da. So I said, Mac, I said, I want to ask you something. I said, you know, will you wear a hat and wear white and sit with the deaconesses? So she said, well, Gary, I'm not doing that. So I'm like, oh, here we go. So I said, well, Matt, you know, so I'm trying to explain it as best as I can. Right. So she asked a question. She said, let me ask you this. She said, a deaconess. She said, who is a deaconess married to? I said, a deacon. She said, okay. She said, are you a deacon? Well. So I said, no. She said, you're the pastor, right? And so I'm like, oh, just wear the hat. You know, that's
right. You're like, what's the story about?
But what it did was, it really helped to frame my optics for ministry. And what I mean by that is this. Sometimes we put people in roles that don't want to be in that role, or that we force into that role. Well, anything that you're not doing from your heart, anything that you don't have a passion to do, well, you're not going to do your best. Right. And so then I determined, I said, you're right. I said, well, what I want you to do is to find your place in ministry. And I said, if it's no more than you just supporting me, you know, our kids were young at the time, you know, and taking care of the kids, then that's what we're going to do. And so I came back and I shared, and, you know, so a couple of people were a little bit sour, you know, because we were a traditional church at the time, but that grew, and that became really, I think it set the stage for me for ministry, not just for her, but all over the church. Ultimately, she started our preschool and our academy, and so it just went on from there. But the key was she found her place.
Right, and she had to take some time to do that.
She
couldn't be put in that box
exactly
that this is the requirement.
That's exactly right. And, you know, one of the things that I've said, as I said, what it has done is that it has shaped my optics for ministry now. When people come to the church sometimes and I encounter them, sometimes they'll say, well, Pastor, what is it that you want me to do? And my question back to them is, what do you feel as though that God has called you to do? Because if the call is based upon your passion, I don't have to get you up. If the call is based upon your passion, then innovation starts with you. I shouldn't have to be innovative in trying to shape everything that you do. And so you bring that to the table. So it was, you know, it was one of many defining moments.
Really early, though, in your career.
Yeah.
Thank God for Maxine. Yeah. And I bet everybody else in church is like, thank God for Maxine. Wow, I love that. I love that that moment was so pivotal. Let's talk about the family.
Okay.
All right, so I understand your son, Gary Jr., is the minister of music.
Yes.
Your daughter, Brittany, the principal of
Yes.
Hopewell Christian Academy.
Yes.
And then your other daughter, Kiana, assists Maxine in running the preschool that you just talked about.
Right.
That's beautiful.
It is.
It is. To watch your children work in the ministry, the place they grew up in.
It is.
How fulfilling is that?
It is. It is one of the blessings of my life. One of the blessings of my life to see my kids, you know, none of them are on drugs. You know, none of them are running the streets. You know, they're a little bit touched at times, but they're good. but they're good kids. But my joy is seeing my kids not only saved, but functioning in ministry. And the other part of that is to see how people within the congregation have embraced them. They've watched them grow up in this church. And so it is one of the most rewarding things in life. Yeah. Yeah.
I love that because them supporting you, though, shows that you were leading the way. And Maxine, you know, watching how they moved, they decided that this was a good place and this was the place where they wanted to make a foundation as well. I love that. That's good. But what are some of the challenges? Because it all has not been just roses. I mean, you have certainly faced a lot of challenges.
Yeah. Well, just internal challenges, external challenges. I mean, we could do, probably 5 segments on, what some of the challenges. No, okay. I think some of the internal challenges were, one of the things I've always been is passionate. I think another thing I've always been driven, and and I've always wanted more, not from a point of self-aggrandizement, not as a result of ego, but I've always felt, as I've always been observant, and as I've operated in other realms and other arenas, I've seen how things have functioned, and I just believe that that the church should function like that as well. And so sometimes, one of the things I say from time to time, I said, now this church is not running halfway the way that I would desire it to run. And that's because I just believe in excellence all the way around. So one of the challenges is sometimes having to slow down, having to be patient, understanding that your drive is not always the drive of the people that you lead, and it does not make them bad people. It's just, I've had to learn to tap into people where they are, and to learn to appreciate, their acumens, their talents, and their gifts where they are. So that's been one of the biggest internal challenges. External challenges is that every place we've been, we've had to fight. When we moved from San Jose to Lorella, we had to fight to be there.
It was a new story.
Yeah. And then when we came out to St. John's, we had to fight to be out here. So, I still got a few boxing gloves, a couple of boxing gloves, but I want to turn that over to someone else. But it's all been worth it, though. When I look back and I see the fruit of the labor, when I see how this church has changed the lives of people within and touched the lives of people beyond, well, it's all been worth the fight. So, yeah.
And you're right where you need to be.
Yeah.
You think when this sanctuary's filled,
Yeah.
and in Mandarin it's filled,
Yeah.
I mean, you should be nowhere else.
Yeah. And I'm excited about that.
You should be. Let's talk about over the years how much the church has grown. My goodness. 2,500 members, of course, the preschool and the academy, radio and television ministries, which are excellent, substantial community involvement, foreign missions, and 2 campuses. It is evident that Hopewell has really flourished under your leadership. And you've got a great team around you too, I do know that. But what do you think has contributed to all of that growth? Because you see some churches that are getting smaller. That is certainly not the case at Hopewell.
Right, and there is an adage which says that motion is lotion. The more active, I believe, and I'm not talking in the vein of busy work, but I think the more active that a ministry is, the more active it is within its community, the more active it is within the congregation. Our focus this year, which has always been there for me, is to always strengthen the community within. Well, what does that mean? That means that, I have this idea that if you don't know more than 15 to 20 people at your church, you're really not connected. Because the aim is to ensure that when you are not here, you are missed. One of the ways of keeping a large church small is to get people connected into ministries and into groups. And so the aim is to make sure that there's a solid connection, there's a genuine connection. And here's the reason why. It's so that when crises come, when challenges come, you don't go through those things by yourself. But then also when there are moments of celebrations, when there are moments of promotions, when there are moments of accolades and achievements, you can also have someone to rejoice with you in that process. But then better yet, we're all doing that under the umbrella of Christ. And the aim is to build a stronger bond with the Lord and a stronger bond with each other. Well, that's truly what I believe building community. It's organic. It's not something that's prefabricated, not something that's made up, not something that's forced. And so when we start seeing people who have made friends from this church, and though they are friends for life now, that's as a result of the organic community within the church. So the aim is to make sure that we're strengthened within. So then we can go out and reach the broader community, is to show the love of Christ. And so there's a lot of outreach. You know, I've always been keen and big on outreach ministry. And so I've challenged the church, hey, go beyond the walls now. Once we get it, let's take it beyond the walls. I said, that's how people begin to see the love of Christ. And then it shows and exhibits the example of what the church should be about. There's so many, different views of the church. But that's one of the things that also keeps me going, is trying to make sure that the church is always seen in the best possible light as we can show it, to bring glory to the name of Christ.
Yeah.
So,
and to be relevant. I think you have a lot of traditional values, but you've had to stretch your mind a little bit. You've had to step into some spaces. You're like, oh, I really didn't think that we could maybe praise the Lord that way, but you've been very open to that, and your ministries show that.
Right, and you have to be. I think the inability to adapt means that you're not going to survive. And so, and the balance there is being able to do it, but not lose focus, of not necessarily what I would say traditions, but more so than truth. Sometimes traditions are not based on truth, but to hold to the integrity, I think, of Scripture, of community, and those things. And so it is a challenge. It is a challenge. One of the biggest challenges is that as people come in, they don't check their culture, or they don't check their trends at the door. So they bring them in, and so those things infiltrate the church. So it's a challenge, but it's par for the course. That's what you do in ministry, and so
You do make it very clear what this church is about.
Absolutely. Well,
that's one thing that you'll never second guess. Yeah, I do know that.
Well, and my motto is, where there's clarity in the beginning, there's clarity in the end. So the aim is not that you will be confused. And I don't want it to be a bait and switch. We're not just trying to get people in this, and so I think, I would rather have 5 healthy people, 5 people that desire to be healthy, than 400 who are sick. And that's all they want to is just to be sick. So, Yeah.
2,500.
Yeah.
Is that my number? 2,500 members. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Something that you've been doing for a very long time, the foreign missions. That has been a big part of the ministry that's always talked about and supported by the congregation. So how did you decide to focus on Malawi?
Malawi, I had a professor, one of my seminary professors, Caucasian professor, Ben Rogers. Dr. Rogers has been telling, Brother Williams, I want you to go to Africa. I said, Doc, I ain't going to Africa. Brother Williams, I want you to go to Africa. He set me up. I invited him to preach, and this was at the Mandarin campus years ago. I invited him to preach. We were all in the back, and we were preparing to pray. And so before we prayed, we got in a circle, and so I forgot who was going to pray. And so he said, Dr. Rogers said, whoever was going to pray, he said, just a moment. Before you pray, what I want you to do is to pray that your pastor will go to Africa with me. And I'm like, you had to do it, didn't you?
Wow, that was a setup.
It was. And so they prayed, whoever prayed, they prayed. Well, the following year I went to Africa. And at that time, there was 19 of us, and I was the only African-American pastor to go. And he connected me with one of the guys who would be my interpreter, for the trip. And he and I bonded. And I shared with him, I said, next year I'm going to come back. This was actually in 1999. And so I told him, I said, next year I'm going to come back. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring a couple of people from my staff. So there were 3 people from my staff that came, and when we went, and I mean, it just really mushroomed from there. I started going into the villages and noticed that some of the Baptist churches didn't have any roofs on them. And I just started inquiring, man, well, why does this church not have any roof? And so some of the ancestral churches, other denominations on and so forth. And so what we started doing is roofing churches. And one of the things that we learned in that process was when we would, they would build the church up, but it was the craziest thing. You would see the church up, but absolutely no roof on it. And so, and if I saw one of them, I saw 10 of them. But long story short, we started roofing churches. And so they, of course, attendance picked up at the church. Then they held learning activities and other things in the building in the process. And so it just mushroomed from there. After then, I went back the following year, 2001, created a task force. And we put them on a stipend, maybe $50 a month. And then what we started doing was doing literacy. We were doing evangelism, but we started doing literacy. And in 2006, we purchased 2 acres of land. And that's where we have now built what we call the Village of Hope. There's a female dormitory, a teacher's home, administrator's home, a couple of other buildings on there. And we have to build a male dormitory and some other things. But we opened that in, it took us a minute, we opened that in actually the same month that we moved into this church, March of 2017. We did the same thing, and we opened up the Village of Hope March of 2017. And so to date, we've had 68 students to graduate. It's a 2-year program that they go through. It's through tailoring. They do tailoring. The first year, they have to pay. The second year, we come up with their tuition. Oh, wow. Yes. So it's and we've been doing that since early 2000s.
That's a strong prayer
Yeah.
that day.
Yeah.
you went and you have conquered. And you have a team that is committed to it when you can't be there.
Yes.
And they're going to keep it going.
And every Tuesday, there's a group. One of my sons in the ministry, Pastor Ernest Berrien, and then Gladys Cooper, who's a member of our church, but every Tuesday at 9 o'clock, they're on conference call with Malawi. So we've been doing that for years, so yeah. Yeah,
I mean, your whole story is about listening and acting, listening and moving, even if it's just an inch.
Sometimes I'm slow, but
okay. But you listen, and you don't not move when you're supposed to move, and I think that's so important.
Right.
Let's talk about leadership. You talked about different churches and different beliefs and how people operate. It's a lot to lead, especially a congregation. Do you recall one of the most difficult times in ministry as a leader?
There have been, over 35 years, several challenging times. Sometimes I think one of the most difficult things is to make change in ministry when you become close to people. I think that's one of my our staff, the people around, we're family. I get the opportunity to know spouses, know kids, that type of thing. And so it's difficult, I think, to do what I do. I think to really be in ministry and be close to people and then learn how to separate sometimes business, from being personal. And so sometimes, in having to move furniture and move pieces for the betterment of the ministry, sometimes it's just a hard pill to swallow. And a lot of times what I do is that I'm always playing the devil's advocate in my mind. Okay, what if this, so it's just, that's just one of a myriad of things. I mean, ministry is much sweeter now than it has been, and for the most part, it's the sweetness has way outweighed the bitterness. But that's one. Yeah.
I know one thing that you've always been is transparent. You don't if it's happening, you bring it before the church.
Right.
No matter how hard it is to say it.
Right.
No one's going to be whispering in corners
Right.
in your church. They're going to hear from you
Well,
first.
they'll still whisper, but
Well, yeah, but then you'll get out. You're still that way, aren't you?
I am. But I think people appreciate that, and my aim and my intent is to be as transparent as I possibly can. Some people say, well, Pastor, yeah, you tell everything. No, I don't. I tell you what I want you to know. That's exactly right. I tell you what I want you to know. But the aim is, and I think my goal and my intent is to show that, once we leave the stage, we're as human up here as we are out there. And sometimes I think in Christianity and in Christendom, we get this lofty look, which is really a facade in many instances, and so the aim is, try to show people, hey man, life is real, I'm having moments, on and so forth, and I think that my prayer is that people will appreciate that. Yeah.
I think that's so important, that none of us are perfect.
Right.
We're all human.
Right.
And it makes you more real and approachable. Right. And also when it comes, especially in the ministry, it's not about the man, it's about God.
Right. That's what it's supposed to be. That's right.
Don't say anything else.
Keep it moving, all right.
All right, let's look ahead. What do you envision for this church and your ministry in the coming years?
More growth, more community activity, and that's our 2025 vision deals with that. As we strengthen the community, is to try the community within. The aim is to try to make a greater impact beyond our walls. There are nonprofits that we support. There are outreach ministries that we do. And I think the more people we have, the more we're able to do that. And my aim is to let people see Hopewell in the community, doing good work and, trying to serve our community, trying to, I think, uplift the name of Christ. So I see it growing. This was not my vision actually years ago. I never envisioned, one church in two locations. I really thought that the Mandarin campus would be it. In 2002, and I used to say that at the end of 2002, I went into a depression. I used to call it that, but it was really not that. It was more so of a burden to do more. I thought in 2002, 2003 that was it. And so, but it was not until the Lord had placed on my heart, it was 30 acres of land. And so back then we had bulletins. We would put everything in the bulletin. And whatever I felt that God had pressed upon my heart to do for the congregation, that's what we would do. I would write it in the bulletin. Hey, vision for 2003 is to procure 30 acres of land to do da-da-da-da-da. Well, from 2003 to 2006, my vision started off here, and my faith was, and it started going down. I'm like, okay, Lord, what's going on? But in 2006, that was when this property came available. And one of our members, Linda McGinnis, found it. And man, it was like when the Lord told me 30 acres of land, the same way I felt about the construction at Mandarin, I had that same passion here. And so, just being able to see, sometimes it's surreal because I'm like, am I a part of this? I work so much until sometimes accomplishments become anticlimactic. It's like, okay, look at what's done, but it's like, I don't think it really phases me. And I don't know, maybe the Lord has me like that so I can just keep focused, but that's where I am. I'm not, I try not to ever get too high and too low. I'm just kind of that, try to remain temperate. Yeah.
I know that feeling.
Yeah.
There's something to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
to your point about the burden to do more,
Yeah.
you're never satisfied.
That part.
You know, there's always an opportunity.
That part. And that was the reason, you know, some people don't understand that. A few people do, but that's exactly where I felt as though that, and this is crazy, I felt as though that if I would have died at the end of God allowing me to see Mandarin come forward, I would have felt as though that my life was incomplete. Because I felt as though, man, there's just so much more to do. And you know, sometimes the mind never shuts off, but I mean, that's just the way that I'm built, so, yeah.
That's a good burden, though,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you were not done.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
had only just begun. All right, let's talk about the advice that you would get to give to young pastors right now. It is a challenging time. There's a lot coming at. There's an expectation to do more, to entertain, you know, to maybe go left a little bit. What advice would you give to pastors who are trying to be successful and trying to make a difference in Christ?
I think that's a great question, Melody. A couple of things I would share with them. One is stay grounded. Two, I would tell them, know who you are. You have to, you cannot suffer from an identity crisis. You know, or you should not suffer from an identity crisis. When a person dies and their body goes to the morgue, and if they're not identified, they are given a placeholder name, Jane Doe or John Doe, until someone identifies this body and is able to put a name to this body. I believe one of the challenges, and it's not just with young preachers, I think it's older preachers, is that we have Jane Doe and John Doe among the living. They don't know who they are. You know, they're taking their cue from TikTok, they're taking their cues from videos, and what is happening is that they look to see, I believe, what happens to fill the room, to fill the place, and to fill the seat. But you can have filled pews with empty heads, and that's the challenge. Other thing I would tell them is that, you know, there's a difference between growing and swelling. Usually when something swells, it's because something is hurt, something has been bruised. Growth takes place, good growth takes place slowly and steadily. You know, you think about your kids, you know, your kids are growing before your eyes, but what causes you to notice it most, you said, you know, boy, them pants hot water, you know, whatever, you know, or girl, we gotta, you know. So as the growth takes place, it's constantly taking place. I think the challenge is also not to necessarily look for instant gratification. You know, sometimes a process, when we're in a process of whether it's losing weight, going to school, or doing whatever, what happens in the process is that sometimes people give up is because they don't see immediate results. So, you know, work the process. And I think that ultimately they have to determine how they want their ministry to end when they think about how it is beginning. So one of the things I'm constantly aiming to look at is, you know, how will I end the ministry? How will I leave the ministry? Will you leave the ministry better than how you found it? Another thing is, I'll share with them several things, as you know by now, but another thing I would share with them is to walk into what they do thinking about the negative. How does this impact my name? How does this impact my family's name? How does it impact the people that I'm leading? Will it bring a reproach on Christ? You know, that's how I take ministry. Before I do something, you know, I'm not one of these guys, you're not going to see me all over town. I'm not going to be all out. That's not me. Because I'm constantly thinking about the optics. You know, say what you want to say. All of us who have a reputation, we had a part to play in that reputation. You work on your reputation. And so depending upon what you want your reputation to be, and that's what I mean about thinking about how things will be to the end. Well, that determines how you start at the beginning. A good friend of mine, Bishop Gary Hall, and he used this kind of adage on riding a horse. He says, now, Gary, how you get on is how you ride. So you got to be careful of what you do because it can come back to bite you in the end. So I would tell them a whole lot of stuff, but those are just a few things.
Yeah. So come see you if you want some more. All right. You know, let's talk about this milestone, 35 years.
I'm feeling old, but yeah.
I don't know how that, I'm always like, middle school is when they got me. I don't know, maybe you were elementary. I don't know how that goes. But as we celebrate this incredible milestone, I know your members, the other leaders in the church are just excited to walk this walk with you. What message would you share with your congregation and really the wider community? Because I think what you said about your advice to young pastors really extends beyond them. I mean, it's for all of us to contemplate. So when you think about your words, your message, you know, what would you want people to hear from you?
I would want them to hear someone, a message of honesty, integrity, decency, a message of hope. I will want them to hear forgiveness. You know, one of the things I've often said is that I don't want to be a part of a church who couldn't show grace when it is needed. And so, you know, when I look back in ministry, my aim is to try to be the best model on earth that I can as a pastor. You know, I want my children to be proud of me. I want my wife to be proud of me. I want the church that I pastor to be proud of me. I don't want them to, if you say, well, who's your pastor? Gary? Well, oh my God. You know, I don't want, you know. And so, but my message is, I think is the message of Christ is one of hope, one of healing, one of courage, you know, one of reality. I think, you know, we have to deal with people where they are. Don't deny where they are. We have to deal with them where they are. But, and so, I mean, I think it's a composite of things, you know, as I think. So I would want the message to at least have all of my message, you know, for the greater community, for the congregation, or whatever, is to be, you know, to have all of those ingredients, you know, that composite, those composites present. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
It's been a
you.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Beautiful
Thank you.
talking with you. Heartfelt words that came from your heart.
Yeah.
You could tell. And thank you again for being a guiding light for
Oh,
this
well,
community for all these years. All these
You
years.
see all my hair is going up. I told them in 2025 I'm growing hair in 2025.
They have a cream for that.
Cream, vitamin E, you name it, I'm coming out. I'm growing hair
you better
in
stop.
2025. That's right.
Pastor
That's right.
Williams.
It's going to be a miracle, but you watch.
Hey,
But you
we've
watch.
seen them. We've seen them happen. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And thank you to our viewers for joining us in this celebration of faith and service. We hope you've been inspired by Pastor Williams' journey. Until next time, may your faith guide you and may you find peace and joy in your own journey.